So here is my retro gaming build, made out of a Raspberry Pi and a lot of 3D print. So here are the main components: a Raspberry Pi 3, a 7-inch screen with controller on the back of it, and my little controller here. The Raspberry Pi has RetroPie already installed on it, ready to go. The first issue I ran into was the 7-inch display not working, till I found out you need to change some preferences on the Raspberry Pi for it to work. I found all the information I need on the LCD wiki page, so if you have the same problem, do this. After that, I set it all up on the test bench and just made sure everything ran perfectly, which it did. RetroPie's awesome, by the way. I've used it heaps and it just seems to work really well with a bunch of different controllers, a bunch of different emulators. I've never really had any issues. The Raspberry Pi seems to be, or the 3 at least, seems to be able to play like up to PS1 games, which is pretty good. And yet here we can see Spyro running absolutely fine, no problems. So let's get on with the rest of the build. I then went into Fusion 360 and made up the little TV to 3D print. I didn't make the case for the Raspberry Pi, that was stolen and slightly adjusted from Thingiverse. Everything was just printed on my Ender 3 Pro, which seems to do a really good job. It's super simple to use. Once the TV was done printing, I then started printing the small NES case. At the moment it is looking a little bit rough, so it will need a primer and a sand, but yeah, this is kind of how it's all going to look. And hopefully the screen will fit there properly. Here I just gave it a really rough sand with like 150 sandpaper to get rid of the real rough bits on it. I did this for all the components. After sanding everything, I gave it a hit with some quite thick Easy Sand primer to help the smoothing process, and then I got my wet sandpaper out and just went ham on it, making it really smooth. This part is definitely worth the hard work, as it just removes all the layer lines or imperfections from the 3D print, makes it look a lot better. After all the sanding was done, I then spray painted all the components. I did about 2 layers to get a nice even coating over all the parts. Here it is once I've finished painting it and putting it all together. I did put this little volume knob in and same that little front panel, a couple LEDs in there. I bolted the legs onto it. Seems to be reasonably sturdy, which is good. I was worried that it might tip over easily, but it seems okay. I did have to do some slight modifications to the cable, or the HDMI cable going into the screen, to make it around the corner there. This is the power module, the boost converter that I went with. I just used some old salvaged laptop batteries because I had them lying around and they were free. Boost converter brings it up to 5 volts from the normal 4.2. The micro USB is to power the screen, and this is to power the Raspberry Pi, as well as bring USB to it. And now it's all ready to be glued into place. I didn't end up getting the bolt holes to work perfectly, and I didn't like the look of them, so I ended up just gluing it all in place. So yeah, like all my other projects, I used way too much hot glue, but it means that I can keep changing everything. You know, some things didn't work out, so with the hot glue it's easy just to pull it all out and try again with something else. But it did look a bit messy in the end, unfortunately. I think if I were to redo it, I would spend a bit more time and make up some nicer 3D printed mounts for everything. But again, the hot glue makes it super easy to go back and change things. And here's the little Raspberry Pi in its case. I put this fan on it and the cooler. I don't really think it's that necessary. I did end up taking it off later on. This is the input for the power and USB to connect to the screen. Here is the USB part. It just goes into the back of one of those USB jacks, and the power connectors here. There's also the fan connector as well. So here I've finally got it all together just for initial testing to see how it works, and everything seems to be okay at the moment. I currently don't have the front USBs connected, so I just got this cable hanging out. However, there was one problem with this setup. The boost converter I was using just could not handle the amount of current being pulled from both the Raspberry Pi and the screen. As you can see here, it's getting up there in temperature. It's already over 70 degrees in some spots, which is really not optimal and not what we want inside that little case with the batteries. So here's the final revision. I made a bunch of changes. As you can see, there's a fan on the back now. Just unscrew it. Unfortunately, I didn't get much video of me doing these final little changes, so I'm just going to show you everything now. First of all, we'll unplug the HDMI through. This is the power for the fan. And then lastly, the little audio input. I'll put that to the side. So here we have the USB-C charger down in the corner. This is runs at 1 amp, so it does get quite hot. So I do have a little fan that's connected to the direct input, so it's always on while charging. Here is the USB and power connector for the Raspberry Pi. You see I went up to 4 batteries, 4 laptop batteries, or 18650s, just 1S. And here's the new boost converter. I replaced that old little one with a much bigger one. I put a heatsink on it. I also replaced the diode for a larger one. And that fan on the back of the case blows directly on it. So now there's plenty of headroom for both the screen and the Raspberry Pi to pull heaps of power and stay nice and cool. I've got this little 1-channel amp and a tiny speaker on the front. To be honest, it doesn't really sound that great, but I kind of just wanted it there anyway. There's a little AUX that connects between it. And yeah, the little LED there, as you saw, when it is turned on. There's a lot of hot glue everywhere. It's ugly, but it does the job. As I said before, and in the future, maybe I'll make up some nicer mounts, or 3D print some nicer mounts, so it all looks a little bit cleaner in there. Now onto the little Raspberry Pi. Just push it together to take it apart. This case is really good. The guy who made it did a good job. Here is the USB and power connector for everything. I ended up taking off that fan and heatsink because it just wasn't necessary. It was running at okay temperature like this. These are the USBs. They are just connected kind of in parallel to the other main USBs on the board. Everything seems to work well. There's a little LED down in there for when it's on. Those buttons aren't actually connected to anything, they're fake. I don't have any buttons that would fit in there nicely, so I just left it like that. And there's the AUX, HDMI, Ethernet if need be. Yeah, that's everything.